Well, welcome back. It's been quite a COVID quarantine hiatus for us for obvious reasons. One, I'll let you take off. Other than two, we've both been busy. More importantly, you.
Yeah, and I was diagnosed with COVID and stuck in a room for a couple weeks and did not look like someone who should be in front of a camera, to be honest. But luckily, I mean, my symptoms were mild. It wasn't too bad. It was mostly just massively inconvenient trying to make sure that the kids and my wife didn't get it.
Yeah. So why don't we start with that?
Again,
why don't you, since you actually have a first world account as a confirmed diagnosis, unlike other people who just might have had it and not known it, take us through it step by step, I guess.
I mean, it comes on strong, and it came on fast, at least for me. It was like fine in the morning, 100-some degree fever, chills, body aches, all that stuff by the evening. And it was just all of a sudden like, oh, I don't feel good. Kind of like how a flu comes on, where you can be like, I'm fine. And then all of a sudden you're like, I am not
No,
fine.
I'm not.
But again, honestly, my symptoms were pretty mild. I had the cough and that kind of stuff, but nothing that was that severe, nothing that was that terrible. I've had much worse flus. I didn't have to be locked in a room for as long, obviously, for the flus, but I've had much, much more severe flus. I have, however, go ahead.
I was saying, do you think that, I guess, does that make you think of the flu differently in the future, that maybe you should keep yourself away from your family, or just that COVID seems to be a little bit more potent as far as its ability to spread?
I think the hard thing with COVID is everyone keeps guessing. I think the thing that makes me nervous is they're guessing, but they're not always presenting it as guesses. Sometimes they present it as factual information, not as here's what we think, but we really don't know anything at this point. Because everyone wants to have the answer. So I think we understand enough how flus move to know, here's what I should do, here's what I shouldn't do. You know, I can be around my kids, but I probably shouldn't be hugging them and rubbing my face on them. And I'm assuming at some point we're going to know more about how this moves, but people say everything from, you know, it hangs outside in the air for hours to
no, it doesn't.
You have to be right up next to somebody, and everybody's guessing at this point, which is dangerous when people start guessing and presenting it as not a guess. So, especially if you're a medical doctor.
I'd like to share two thoughts that maybe we'll shelve for a moment while you finish your COVID trajectory, but one is security and freedom, and the other one is the binary black and white decision-making process, which is, you know, what you just alluded to. So I like to kind of shelve those, you know, two topics that are basically two different coins, and kind of wrap up what your COVID experience was, since it's the first time that, you know, it's kind of funny. I mean, in the context of the podcast, we've been talking about this for a while, but neither one of us had direct experience, or at least so we thought. And now you have a confirmed direct experience. And, you know, for people who haven't had it or don't know if they've had it, you know, it sounds like normal flu symptoms.
For the most part, yeah, it was normal, somewhat mild symptoms for me. The hardest part was honestly keeping my kids from being nervous, because there's so much anxiety of this outside, and we try to best to keep it out of the house, make sure they're not watching the news, because that doesn't help anything, being afraid all the time, but it still permeates and gets in, which makes it tough.
That's almost a whole other podcast on its own, which is, how do you navigate around the world news that is spread faster than the coronavirus in a day and age where kids have instant access to all information, and, you know, that it's not always good information, which is also maybe a third topic, which is now YouTube is, you know, pulling down content that doesn't fit some type of structural narrative that they've decided is truth. And it's truly, they've decided that it's truth, because, as you've discussed, plenty of people in the professional world that are trying to find the truth are coming to different conclusions. So I guess we have three topics we have to address. that
Yeah,
just the discussion of your experience is bringing up three major topics.
absolutely. And on top of that, while I was going through my, quarantine and symptoms and things like that, and again, I was lucky, it wasn't too bad. I had two different family members who passed away from it. One much older, one, in their 60s. And again, I go back to what you and I have talked about before, which is it's too bad that we didn't rally around those people more. Make sure that the people taking care of them had everything they need, PPE equipment. Because people seem to think the way they wear it, that PPE equipment is mostly to keep you safe. And it's not. Most of the stuff you're wearing, or especially face masks, is to keep other people safe from you because you might be carrying it. That's where it's the most effective. So if the people caring for the most at-risk population have everything they need to keep that person safe from them bringing it to them, that's who we needed to rally around. And we didn't. Everybody kind of grabbed what they felt like they needed, so they felt safe, and then there's not enough to go around.
Well, I guess we might as well go right for the all or nothing black and white part of the conversation, because there's a lot of nuance to life that we just don't ever bring up in the national conversation these days, which is, like you said before, you don't want people to worry to the point that they're anxious and running out of PPE equipment and toilet paper. But on the other side, you don't want them to be underprepared. And the problem is in the world of divisiveness, paranoia and conspiracy rules. So as soon as somebody says, don't worry, they drop the don't. Like, oh my gosh, they're saying don't worry. That means we should really freak out. So as you've stated, the people who really needed the protection didn't get the protection. And now you have the other side of it, which is I see people driving their cars with gloves and masks on, with their windows up. And bicyclists bicycling alone with a mask on. And we wonder why people get into car accidents and accidents, because they're basically passing out. So walk us through this, since you're more the scientist and I'm more the karate teacher. Why on earth is it a bad idea to be wearing a mask constantly?
Well, and especially if you're riding a bike or running, I mean, yeah.
Or driving a car by yourself?
Or driving a car by yourself. Wear a mask in public is what they said, meaning when you're going to be within 6 feet, 10 feet of other people. But especially those N95s, not even the medical N95s, they seal, not completely, but they seal somewhat, which means it's harder to breathe and you're getting in less oxygen. If you wear that for too long, especially while you're doing a stressful activity, your odds of passing out are through the roof. And I promise, riding your bike passed out unconscious, full speed into oncoming traffic is going to be a lot more dangerous to your health than anything you could catch. Yeah. And it's scary, but there's so much fear. It's amazing what happens when fear takes over in your brain, and you almost get stuck in it. You get in these positive feedback loops where you get stuck in your own fear. Yeah. And the other parts of your brain that are designed to mitigate that fear almost get locked out, and you just get stuck. I'll be honest, when I was locked in that room and I had nothing but time, I was looking up stuff on COVID and the best ways to prevent it from getting from me to my family and that kind of stuff. I mean, it was just
put butter on your head and wrap it in saran wrap, right?
Yeah, exactly. It was just COVID deaths. Young person dies of COVID. 30-year-old dies of COVID. COVID deaths. COVID's killing people. It was hard to find any just here's some science. I mean, and now still, because I looked that stuff up, in my feed is just people dying of COVID constantly. Yeah. I had to keep reminding myself, as much as I know about psychology and as much as we've been talking about this disease, I had to keep reminding myself, this is not the full story. This is media. Like, and that's someone who should know better. And
Yeah.
I had to do mental work to keep the anxiety at bay because it's all that's out there. Someone who isn't able to do that, they're going to go into a panic, and people do really crazy, foolish things when they're panicked.
Yes. And it's interesting because coming from my vantage point is we both kind of bridge the gap on psychology because I'm dealing with the stress of self-defense. And one of the things I always tell people is most of the reason why people don't see some attack coming, it's called the invisible hit, which is kind of a funny thing because it's not invisible, but it's invisible to the eye because our perceptions of what is happening versus what is actually happening is usually what throws us for a loop. So we perceive someone's movement because we think that they would move this way, and then they don't, and then we get hit. And this is exactly like the COVID or anything else. Is there's all these unintended and first, second, third order effects that are coming along with this paranoia, which in a weird way is taking a step back because we have a landscape of divisiveness that has been hitting a fever pitch over the last probably 10 years, is that when you present news, it has to be extreme even when it's not. And we always get more of what we incentivize. So it doesn't matter if it's the active shooter phenomenon, which is the more you talk about that person, the more you glorify that person, the more you are likely to have those people come forward.
Yeah.
If you incentivize people to seek out, news sources that are about COVID, well, you're incentivizing advertising dollars to go reach out to people who are providing the most amount of COVID data. So then you're going to raise the news feed up to COVID. And now, as all these hospitals and states are now, articles are finally coming out about these incentivizations, is now I don't know how good the data is on COVID anymore, or if it ever was really pure, because now there's more federal tax dollars being rolled into the number of COVID patients or COVID deaths you have in your state. So
even some of the positive news is twisted to make it negative. Like they found out in a few countries that 25 to 50% of people who get this remain asymptomatic, which means that's a lot of people that never have any symptoms and are totally fine. Now, you could take that as a positive, that many people get this disease that we're all afraid of and don't even notice that they have it. But all the articles are skewed towards they're out there. They don't even know that they're out there. Be afraid, be afraid, be afraid, which is not helpful. Everyone's already afraid. Could use that to say, hey, like, this isn't a death sentence. Here's some positive news that we've gotten. You do have to continue to be somewhat intelligent and careful. But that's not, but that, like you said, we're going for clicks. What gets the most clicks, right? And making it scary is going to get more clicks than making it not scary. And the people who are writing it use the same logic as they did back when we used to have gladiators killing each other in an arena, which is, I didn't create the demand. That's what the people want. It's their fault. I'm just giving them what they want. Right? And it's not mine. This isn't, I have nothing to do with this. I didn't create any demand for this. And it just removes you from it.
I'm not guilty. I'm just a willing participant.
Exactly.
Huh?
Yeah.
Well, that's akin to, the bystander behavior of whipping out the cell phone and watching a murder happen versus whipping out the cell phone, call 911, or you end up having 10 angles on a video of some horrific event when those 10 people could have affected a better outcome to said event.
Yeah.
So, and this is, this kind of goes back to the freedom and security issue too, which is how much tolerance do we have for a lack of freedom, and how much are we willing to sell our freedom for security? And especially with this particular instance, is how much are we willing to sell our freedom for a perception of security of which we do not really know what we're being secured from. Because obviously, as one of the issues we discussed, is plenty of people are going out into the wild anyway, either because they have essential jobs or because they need to go get food. And masks aren't perfect, or there's a point in time where you just don't have your mask or don't have it on, or maybe somebody doesn't have it on right, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, whatever made up thought process you want to have that transmits it, because there is no guarantee. It isn't like when you come into contact with somebody, your mask turns a different color, so now you know COVID is in the area. It's not like when you touch something, your finger turns a different color, so you don't know where you may have picked it up, and then you go home. And you go home to people with compromised immune systems, not because they're sick, but because their immune system hasn't been active in a month or 2 months or 3 months.
And there are a myriad of countries handling this in very different manners, all the way from more like us, everybody locks down, stay at home all the time, all the way through to like everyone continues to go to work, just be smart, take some precautions, be intelligent, but people continue to work and all that kind of stuff and still go out, and everything in between. And there's nothing wrong with, in the beginning, with no information, making a decision and then thinking through it, watching what other people are doing, and then deciding, you know what, I don't know if I made the right decision, I'm going to rethink this. There's nothing wrong with making mistakes as long as you're constantly evaluating what you're doing based on what everyone else is doing and what's working. And I don't seem to see a lot of that happening. Like, this is what's working for these people. This is not working well over here. This is working well over there. And trying to figure out what's the best response to this. I just see everyone deciding in the beginning, here's what we're doing, and then we're just doing it, instead of actively processing how effective is it? Did we make a mistake early on? Which is fine, as long as you acknowledge we made a mistake and we're going to make an adjustment to that mistake.
No, there's no problem with cobbling together an answer as the problem's unfolding. So as you were speaking, I was thinking of two different theories that I discuss in self-protection, which is you have your fight, flight, and freeze, which is the typical response to some type of stimulus that, let's just say that the tiger jumps out of the bushes. Well, everyone freezes first. So the freeze, like everyone hunkers down. You know, if you get startled, your shoulders come up, your hands come up, you squat down a little bit lower, and it's that startle response. So there's your freeze point. That totally makes sense. Like we were just discussing, in the first 2 weeks is kind of like the freeze response. We just don't know what to do, so just hunker down and just look for the next movement. The tiger just jumped out of the bush. Maybe it doesn't see us, or maybe it does. But either way, I have to figure out what I need to do. Do I need to freeze a little bit longer, and maybe it doesn't see me and smell something else and goes off? Do I need to fight it, or do I need to flee? Can I run away? Which is probably not going to happen with the tiger, but I gave the tiger analogy, so we're not running, we're fighting and freezing. That's it. But the other side of it is what's discussed as the OODA loop, which is a military terminology, but I think it's so apt for personal self-protection as well as this type of thought process, which is you first have to observe something. That's the first O. So we observe the tiger. Then we have to orient. We have to turn towards the tiger, or maybe it jumped to my right or my left, doesn't really matter. Then I have to decide what to do. Then I actually have to act on that. And those two things are totally normal to change in fractions of a second. So your fight, flight, freeze response could be all in 1 second. You might freeze, fight, and then flee all within 2 to 3 seconds. And same thing with the OODA loop. And I don't understand how we've lost the micro to macro connection. That on the human level, on that microcosm that I just explained, there's absolutely no wrong with the macrocosmic level of a town or a county or a state or a nation to not only have varied responses on every single level, but also have interconnected communication on what is or isn't working. And if I remember my history right, it's almost like there was these guys that created this thing called a constitution. And it was like in this whole conversation about the Federalist Papers and the state experiment, because if you had more states, you'd have more different experiments about how to successfully maintain a free society. I don't know. Maybe it was like a science fiction book. Was that what it was?
It
L. Ron
sounds
Hubbard?
familiar.
Or
It
was it?
certainly sounds familiar.
I can't remember if that was my historical or science fiction class I took. I don't know. But so that's how I see it. And I'm not saying I can't be moved. I'm saying I can't be moved from that template of processing thoughts, feelings, and actions that we're going through.
And constantly reprocessing them. And it's great that so many different countries are behaving differently. And even so many different states in the US are behaving differently, because it gives you a snapshot of what's helpful and what's not. And there's other things to compare.
You're wrong. You're wrong. Everyone should be doing the same thing. Stop spreading misinformation and have YouTube take you down.
They might, because we're saying question anything.
Yeah.
But it doesn't make any sense not to utilize that fact. Again, like we've talked about before, how many times have there been global events? You know, you're talking world wars and pandemics are two of the primary times where like the whole world is in something together.
Yeah, I'd say even world wars have been less together than this.
Definitely. And why not use the fact that this is a global event and have everybody compare notes? But again, doesn't seem to be happening. Everybody look at everyone else. What are they doing? What are we doing? What are you doing?
Well, the weird thing is, again, going back to that micro-macro conversation that I was putting out there, is there's a worldwide poker game going on when it comes to information at this point. Nobody really wants to show their hand, and their hand includes everything from what's working to what's not working to how many cases of COVID do really exist or not. So not only does that happen within every country, you know, because, you know, if a state wants more funding, what's to say that we know they're not increasing or their COVID numbers for more funding? Because now every state is basically, any state that was close to bankruptcy is now assuredly bankrupt. So they're going to need as many federal dollars as they can to kind of get restarted. And this is totally not a political statement. This is a mathematical statement.
Yeah.
So if you feel like you might get more federal relief by increasing your COVID numbers, how does any single person take every single state's database and say, oh, it's 100% true? I'm sure even from hospital to hospital, there are probably people in hospitals who say, yeah, there's no way they're getting the numbers that they're getting because we're getting these numbers. But who knows who's true, who's right? Just because I'm personifying the guy who thinks the other guy's numbers are wrong, maybe his numbers are wrong.
And somewhere they're thinking that the false negatives on the tests are somewhere around 30%. It could be issues with the collection method. It could be issues with getting enough of the RNA. There's a whole bunch of theories on why, but it's somewhere around 30%. So you know the numbers are going to be off right there. Not everyone can get tested. Not everyone's symptoms are severe enough to even warrant a test.
Or some people who have already had it.
Yeah. How in the world could you possibly have accurate numbers? And then if you add on top of that, that potentially 25 to 50% of people remain asymptomatic the entire time they have it, any numbers that are out there are really just a count of the most severe cases.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
For the most part.
Yeah, no, I agree.
And then the rest, they just kind of fill in. And I agree. Why wouldn't you fill in a little bit more than that might even be true to get some more federal dollars because you're looking out for your state?
So it's a little bit like the story about TBI and was it CTE?
Yeah.
Traumatic
CTE.
brain injury, and CT is the
chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Yeah, that happens a lot in football.
Yes. Say that again because I spoke over to you, the CTE again.
Chronic traumatic encephalopathy.
That's what it was. Okay. So one of the articles I read about it, because I played football a lot when I was a kid, and I banged my head around for sport as a kid. That's a whole other conversation. Anything from soccer to football to being a knucklehead. So one of the things that I read in the article is when you look at the studies done for CTE and TBI, the first question that this article poses when looking at the data is, well, who came to the trials? Who came to the study? People who have already complained of TBI and CTE. So of course the results are completely skewed. So when you look at 100 cases of people who have complained about CTE and TBI, 98% of them have TBI or CTE. It's like, wow. It's like, we had 1,000 people come in thinking that they had a broken finger, and 97% of them did. It's unbelievable. And, and so same thing with what you're talking about, which is, 97% of the people coming into a hospital complaining of possible COVID, symptoms are going to come out with COVID symptoms, like ding, like there you go. And right from the beginning, a lot of hospitals weren't even taking people in unless they had open symptoms that they could say, yes, it's worth a test or not. Now, I don't even know if it's possible to have had enough tests no matter what the preparation was. The only way to have had the correct number of tests was to literally have 350 million tests on hand prior to figuring out what this thing was. So even if we were completely on it and we were almost a precog Minority Report, Tom Cruise group of crack anti-COVID doctors and scientists, even if we had a week or even a month ahead of time, how would you create a test and produce the test and get it out to 350 million people?
And then you test them all once.
Yes.
And everyone's like, well, I might have been exposed yesterday. I need to get retested.
Thank you for filling in the rest of this. Exactly. So, but of course, it's
there's no way. Yeah.
Justine was telling me she was seeing a lot of things on Facebook, which I know you're not on, and there's plenty of funny memes that are coming out about this. But one of the big pet peeves that she and I have is, again, this black and white kind of situation that we've been discussing that is very vindictive, which is if you are questioning staying at home or questioning whether or not we should be going back to work, then basically you just want people to die.
Yeah.
And it's like, hold on a second. We've discussed right from the beginning of this podcast, there is a sliding scale of what is true, what is not true, and a lot of it is conjecture that's trying to move the ball to a positive direction. And questioning someone else's, concern is now literally somebody basically said, if you question my concern, just choose one or two family members of mine that should die. And you're like, how does that even, that's not even a conversation starter. That's not even anything that
it's the opposite, right? Yeah. That's an easy conversation ender. Yeah. To say, I don't want to have this conversation. I already know I'm right. I don't want to hear anyone else's opinion. If you don't agree with everything I think, then you are the worst kind of human being.
Yes, it is an emotional exacerbator, though. And it is a good way to force the uninitiated to your side, even if they weren't on your side, because God forbid you should be an awful person for questioning someone else's loose conjecture about how we should be running 7 billion people's lives right now.
And people assume silence means agree. So if you get quiet, that means you agree with me or you've come to my side. Yes. So if you say, I think X, and I say, by thinking X, you want people to die, and then you back off, then I assume that I won the argument, and not that you just went internally, you know what, it's not even worth it to get in an argument with this lunatic.
Yeah. Yeah. No, what's the old saying is that sometimes responding to critics just validates their opinion.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
and the scary thing is those people are then locked in their own opinion.
Oh, yes.
Because eventually people stop giving you any other opinions or any other information. You either get nothing or you get people agreeing with you because it's too much work to disagree with you. And that's a dangerous place to be for the person themselves, because then you're only ever going to know or think the things you already know or think. And no one's ever going to challenge you on anything.
You know, it's funny. I didn't intend this, I swear, but it ends up being like this oftentimes when we're talking. It's a bit of a shameless plug about what I've posted on Facebook for my either Monday or Friday. Usually we do a podcast on Monday, so Monday I always post something in the town forums. And I posted my own snippet, which is that one of the first things that we teach is how to control yourself, because that's your first lesson and most important lesson towards safety and freedom. And basically that the way to a peaceful warrior is someone who is able to make the right decision on every turn. And that's a goal and a tenet, and obviously it's a very difficult thing to do. But one of the reasons that I came up with that thought process, not that I haven't thought about it before, but one of the reasons why I decided to use it as the ad is because a meme spurred that thought process that I saw over the weekend. And the meme is just perfect about what we're talking about. An unhealed person can find offense in pretty much anything someone does. A healed person understands that the actions of others has absolutely nothing to do with them. Each day you get to decide which one you will be. And it's a huge challenge right now. You know, the desire to throw hate around for people who don't think like you do is a tremendous disservice to humanity, because if everyone thought like me, we wouldn't be having the technology that we have between the two of us to talk. Because I just don't think that way. I'm way more of a hands-on, person-to-person, in-person type of guy. So this medium wouldn't exist if the whole world was like me.
And I would absolutely hate being in a place where everyone agreed with me and thought like me, because that sounds boring. It sounds like I would stagnate. There's no growth or development. I want to be around people who have a different perspective, think differently, question me, disagree with me. That's where you find a common ground, or you realize that there's a totally another opinion out there that's also valid, but doesn't invalidate your own opinion. It makes everything more interesting, and it provides room for growth. Where everyone just agreeing, those are the worst kind of teams at work, in the medical community. I imagine in a dojo, the worst kind of groups are people who all have the exact same training, exact same thought process, and exact same way of looking at every situation. How are you growing in that?
You can't. I don't know if you've ever done this in psychology classes, but this is something that I definitely picked up in philosophy, which is whenever I come to some type of conundrum as to how or why the mind works the way it does, is I go back to, let's just say, the first interaction with another human being, or the first interaction with some inanimate object. So what you're talking about is a lot. I like to use this analogy often in explaining coming to knowledge. What if the first two people encountering a lake both just decided that don't touch a lake because we don't know what it is, don't figure it out, and then they just die of dehydration? And that's it. Period. End of story. Versus one person is a little bit more curious than the other person. They at least put their finger in it, and that encouraged the other person to put their finger in it, and there's kind of just almost one-upmanship. And then, okay, who can taste it? Okay, it's not burning me or anything. And then, oh my gosh, this is exactly what I needed. You know, without that interplay, you know, we wouldn't have a civilization, basically. We wouldn't have human beings. It just would have died on the vine.
Yeah, and it's good to have all the different categories, right? You have the person who's nervous and scared and won't go anywhere near the lake. You have the other person who will get close but's nervous. And then you have the third person who will swing on the vine right in the middle of the lake. And you need all three. Yeah. The one who jumps in is going to show you what's safe and not safe.
Yeah.
The one who's cautious is learning from both. And the one who's scared is the one who's going to be like, that's a big animal. That looks like an alligator. We should get out now. Right? You need all three. It's not like the guy who jumps in is the best or the guy who's afraid is the best. You need all three of those people to even each other out and teach each other, right?
Absolutely.
And then maybe the guy cannonballs in doesn't get eaten by an alligator, and the guy who's afraid of everything doesn't die of dehydration.
Yeah, it's so true, but it's so strange that we're almost voluntarily trying to become a monolith. And it's very unsettling to me, because the one thing I'm trying to teach people, period, but more specifically kids, is that yourself is the most important thing to consider in everything. Because if you aren't safe, then everything else is secondary. Once you feel safe, you can learn math. Once you feel safe, you can learn about history. Once you feel safe, you can learn how to speak and write and communicate better. But if you don't have your own personal safety, then everything else is pointless. And when you have this desire for everyone to basically be monolithic zombies, which is this is the way we go, then you're very much voluntarily becoming a lemming, and you are no longer concerned about your safety. You're concerned with being ostracized from the monolithic voice that is telling you what to do because everyone else is doing it. And that's the death of a society.
Yeah, because then you're stuck in whatever mistakes you end up making from the start, like we talked about with this whole situation. Whatever decision gets made in the beginning, that's what everyone does, and you just stick with it till the end. And that's a large part of how a lot of major civilizations collapsed, is everyone started thinking the same, everyone got greedy, made the exact same mistakes. I mean, if you look through some of the major collapse of civilizations, a lot of the markers and mistakes line up with each other pretty well and are very similar to each other.
Well, it's the old thought experiment. I think Jordan Peterson brought this up, is even if you are the most benevolent dictator and really are in the interest of self-protecting your whole society, what happens when you die? And the next guy comes up and just really doesn't have the same, the same selflessness or the same compassion for people. And one of the first conversations I typically have with people about self-defense is, we're so used to being polite to people that we don't practice having polite boundaries. We just assume that if someone says, hey, come on over here, we respond, we don't question it. If someone just walked up and said, hey, come on over here, the first instinct would be to, I don't know you, but the first instinct is still, is that compulsion to go follow that person. And there's a joke that I think is really great. That is one of the funnier memes that was out even before this COVID, which is, there are way more a-holes in your life than you think. And here's how you prove it. Go into a crowded area and go, hey, a-hole, and see how many people turn around. And it's just a great play on the human condition, because everyone would turn and look, because even if you don't think you're an a-hole, you want to know who turns around because they're the a-hole. And those hive mind group mindsets just really are hilarious and scary at the same time. Because like you said, when you were in quarantine, is that you had to work your way out of becoming overly paranoid. And when I hear things like that, I realize that as much as I try and keep myself deconditioned to that Pavlovian response to societal growth shifts, is that when I read that, like, I would definitely turn my head. I know I would turn my head. I can't deny that I would turn my head. I would definitely be like, huh?
But the important thing is, after you turn your head, to recognize, right? Like, oh, I'm one of the people who did it, right? If you can at least, like me, recognizing while I was reading it, this stuff is affecting how I'm thinking of it.
Yes.
This stuff is not truth, and then I can work my way back out of it, as opposed to just leaning into it.
My way out of it.
Exactly. So if you can at least recognize, like, oh, like, I don't want to be here, I can get my way back out of here because I got my way into here.
Well, and that's where I think the national conversation is trying to go right now. Uh, but there's a lot of resistance because uh, there's so much fear in that. What do you call that? Surface tension on a water droplet.
Oh yeah.
I almost want to call it a meniscus because it's kind of like that, on your knee. But whatever that is, we have to figure that out. I feel I have to figure out what that is. But there's that surface tension that we're really having a hard time fighting about trying to get society back to balance. And now people are talking about no summer camps, and people are talking about school in September, and it's like, oh my gosh.
And this is what they were having trouble getting people to follow stay at home and social distancing, and there were all the 20-something-year-olds who are rushing to bars and sharing beers and that kind of stuff. So their thought was, to get people to respect this and stay home, we'll use fear.
Yes.
It worked pretty well. The problem is that now you have massive widespread fear. And now you have to deal with opening things back up or having intelligent conversations with a bunch of people that you just finished scaring, right? It'd be like if there was a room in your house you didn't go into, and I was like, Darren, don't go in that house because there's a serial killer in there and he will murder you and your family the second you open that door. And I just did that to keep you out of the room because you had a present in there that I didn't want you to see. And then all of a sudden I say, okay, I went a little overboard with that, but we're going to open the room. You would freak out. You'd be like, what's the matter with you? Right now,
Darren, I have a big surprise for you. Go open that door.
Yeah. Now I have to deal with the fact that I scared you. It's not like, oh, it worked. He didn't go in the room. Now I have to deal with the repercussions of having scared you, except you're hundreds of thousands of millions of people.
Yep. So the sad part is that I took a brief look up while you were telling me that it's just surface tension. I guess in describing surface tension, it's just surface tension.
For it too.
I want a cool scientific name. Someone come up with a cool scientific name, and maybe that was just my bad Google foo search, but it just looked like it's surface tension. It should have a cool name though.
It does. It seems like one of those things that should. I think the scientists missed on that.
Yeah. Somebody missed out an opportunity of naming surface tension of water with their own last name.
Oh yeah. I mean, named after an old white guy, right? That's what everything in science seems to be named after.
Oh, that's too funny. Yeah. So you're 100% right though. How do you have a rational conversation with a group of people that you just spent the last couple months turning into paranoid schizophrenics that are fear mongering each other? But here's the other bipolar nature of this. While everyone will tell you about how scared and their virtue signaling their ability to go over, above, and beyond in protecting themselves and each other from behaving this, in this Byzantine kind of way during quarantine, they're the same people that are running around outside. I've never seen more people in my condo complex outside, ever. They're all hanging out. They're all, sitting around. And yes, there's social distancing, but they are more social now than they've ever been before. And I'm thinking, what did it? I guess it took a quarantine for communities to kind of recognize that they have neighbors and they want to hang out with them because they're so bored and or scared of going through the news for the umpteenth time and just hearing COVID.
Yeah. And it's a shared experience, and people want to feel like they're in a community and having this shared experience, but you're not supposed to be in a community and share the experience. So it's a normal urge to want to share with other people, but you're not supposed to, and you can't see, you're not supposed to go see your family, you're not supposed to go see your friends, you're not supposed to go see your colleagues, and everyone still has all those social desires and social needs in there, and you don't know what to do with it.
It's interesting. Now, bring up this portion of the conversation. I think I've talked to you about the book Tribe.
Yeah.
And one of the psychological studies that happened during World War II in London was that, let's just say it was 15 people per 100 were having some type of psychiatric treatment or at least some psychotherapeutic treatment prior to World War II. Then during World War II and the fire bombings in London, doctors and scientists were really concerned that it would destroy the community and humanity because it would have an increase in anxiety and all these issues, and society would erode. And instead, it took the complete opposite turn, and people didn't need the medications, they didn't need the therapy, and they had something to focus on that was real about their immediate community. But the communities outside of it, in the northwestern portion of the UK, they had an increase in anxiety and concern because they were too far away from the problem to actually help or do anything about it. So I'm going to make a weird prediction, which is I wonder if we have a spike in mental health issues after this, because when people go back to normal life, they're going to realize how out of balance their actual life was, and it took quarantine to reset their natural equilibrium about how they want to run their lives.
That would make a lot of sense.
I wonder.
Absolutely.
So that's my hypothetical prediction.
Yeah, it would make a lot of sense. And I think some people might be using this time to reevaluate their lives and try and improve themselves or think about what they want from their lives with all this time left at home to think for those people who aren't working. Other people are, in a panic because they lost their job and they haven't gotten Social Security yet, and they're trying to figure that whole mess out.
Yeah.
And then there's people who are just in complete fear and are letting this run their lives completely. And it will be interesting to see what that group of people does on the other side of this. Like you said, the people who aren't as affected, those are like the people in the north, right? They're not all that financially affected. They're not really dealing with this head on, but they're kind of adjacent to it. So it's affecting them to a degree, but not as much as the person who lost their job, trying to get Social Security benefits, but they can't get through the system and they worry they're going to lose their house. They're in the middle of it. Once they get through this crisis, I mean, they might feel some sense of accomplishment, like I survived that. While the person adjacent to it might feel like they have a giant spike in anxiety and trauma and things like that.
The other side effect that I wonder what's going to happen, especially in our area being so close to New York, is how much does this make people living in New York want to spread out and move out? I mean, it's a pretty common situation that the general always fights the last battle, but it still doesn't change the fact that, maybe businesses in the New York and New Jersey area are going to think twice about, especially in this technological day and age, of creating these hubs where their whole business is kind of sucked into the physical location to where their customer base is, versus just having a smaller crew where their physical base is and having their actual, cerebral hub maybe in more places that are more spread out. I don't know, because obviously we're still working. I know we're not as productive as we probably typically are in a normal environment, but we are still managing to keep the country running and enough businesses running to keep enough people employed. But things like retail are just getting absolutely destroyed. I mean, I've been incredibly lucky, given the support that I have and the dedication that I've put into my student body and families and vice versa, to be as lucky as I am. I mean, it's a combination of lucky, skill, and dedication, and reciprocal respect for in the continuity of running the business, because I care about my families and the kids, and they care about my well-being, which is, I feel, I hate saying this, but it's a Facebook thing, so I hate saying it, but I feel blessed in that regard.
Yeah.
But, I just heard that, places like Banana Republic or J. Crew might just be done.
Yeah.
And then what happens when, almost every other business in the Short Hills Mall is gone?
Yeah.
You know,
And then all those jobs and everybody who
yep,
worked in retail, well, then the few stores that are open, everyone who has experience in retail is going to rush them to try and get a job, and there's not going to be enough.
yeah,
Yeah.
and even if um, the difficulty is the domino effect of a company as big as J. Crew or Banana Republic going bankrupt, for example, and then just in time, the economy opens back up, and it's like, okay, well, how do I get back in the Short Hills Mall? And how does Taubman Company, which owns the Short Hills Mall, how do they recover from their lost, wages in leasing and rental fees? And then, if that real estate bust happens, how close are we to another bubble like we were in 07, 8, 9? Because if you have a commercial real estate bubble burst, which is kind of what we had in 07, 8, 9, as well as residential. Interestingly enough, I think the residential will be safer than the commercial at this point, because I think the money from New York will shift to New Jersey. And even if it reduces the price in New York a little bit, people will come up into that position as people move out to our area, is my guess. It just seems that that's kind of what happens when New York takes a little bit of a hit. They hide out in New Jersey.
Yeah.
So I guess that'll be another conversation, speculation for the next one. So I know you need to wrap up and get to work.
Yeah.
Well,
Unfortunately.
it was good talking to you. I'm glad we got to this part in the trajectory.
Me too.
And
In this
I'm glad.
saga. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you're healthy and everything's going well. I guess we'll see what the news provides us for the next week, and we'll try and catch up again on Monday.
Yeah. And continue to use this global event to try and learn different lessons through something that's shining a spotlight on some of our human flaws.
Yeah, because we all got lots of them.
Definitely.
Hey, man, good talking to you.
Good talking to you.